If the climate can change, why can't we? The 9 artists from around the Pacific featured in Inundation offer powerful testimony, palpable imagery, and poetic intervention that bring the viewer closer to different climate situations around the Pacific Ocean.
Aloha mai kako. I'm Jaimey Faris, curator of Inundation, Art and Climate Change in the Pacific. I'm also a professor here on Oahu at the University of Hawaii at Manoa.
Aloha mai. I'm Mina, Elison, curator of the Donkey Mill iteration of Inundation.
Mina, it's so lovely to share this space with you. So last year, in January 2020, I launched the exhibition here in Honolulu, and we did a lot of in-person programming. So I'm really thrilled that this exhibition has been able to go to other islands. And even in this time of COVID, that we've been able to collaborate and do these digital programs so that folks can learn a little bit more about the artists and the work in the exhibition.
We'll be posting virtual studio visits on the Donkey Mill's website, but today we're going to give you a behind-the-scenes look at how the exhibition came together and some of the most important issues that the artists address. Jaimey, can you tell us a little bit about Inundation and what motivated you?
Yes, so what motivated me? As an arts educator, I can't emphasize enough my belief in the power and importance of art to tell stories, to share emotions, and to act as witness for this transforming world. For decades, I've worked with artists across the Asia Pacific, often bringing them to Hawaii to work with myself and to exhibit their art. And in the past 5 years, I've also been really concerned about climate change. So I wanted to bring those two interests together in this show. And in particular, I was really hoping to communicate to my students different perspectives about climate change, especially Pacific perspectives of climate change. My students often come to the issue of climate change from a very US-based perspective, that the government's going to solve the problem, that climate change is in the future or far away, and that it can be solved with massive green energy projects or with more dams or with carbon taxes. And the reality is that we're all experiencing climate change now, especially in the Pacific. And I wanted to bring our Pacific cousins to the table to share their stories about what climate change means to them. Right now, they're facing some really extreme things: rising sea levels, threatening their shorelines, their agriculture, their water systems, intensifying storm systems. All of this affects their ability to survive at this moment. So with Inundation, I basically wanted to invite several artists who live and have roots in various places across the Pacific to share their experiences of what's happening on their islands and on their coasts. Many of these artists I've worked with for over a decade. I first got to know Angela Tiatia when we worked on a regional exhibition called Pan-Pacific Nation in 2009. The way that she addresses her roots in Samoa and affirms her Pacifica, Wahine, identity and power in general is so important, and I've been inspired by her work since I've known her. And then she's done these recent climate change performance films made on the main islands of Tuvalu. So I definitely wanted to include Angela Tiatia in the project. And then Kaili Chun, I've known for almost as long. I began collaborating with her in 2012 when I helped her organize a 24-hour installation piece on Waimanalo Beach. These were huge steel structures, 50 of them, that we placed into a grid on the beach. And the importance of the project was really to witness and stand with the elements: the surf, the tide, the sun, and the moon. So my connection to these artists has grown over the last decade, and with them I've witnessed major transformations in our island landscapes and seen the sad reality that island countries like Tuvalu or Samoa or the Marshall Islands are facing right now. Yet at the same time, there's such resiliency in the cultures on these islands. So I really wanted to create an exhibition where we could talk about both the importance of climate change and all of the futuring potential that these artists and their communities are doing together. So I brought these together under a climate justice lens. Through a climate justice lens, we can look at the history of climate change and really pay attention to the history of energy intensive and carbon intensive cultures that have really done most of the damage to the environment. And so a lot of the Pacific Islanders are really asking the rest of the world to pay attention and to do their part to solving the issue. So I really wanted to create a space where art could address not so much the science of climate change, but the role of culture, politics, and economic systems. The idea of inundation is really to ask, what is truly inundating us? Is it the waters of the ocean, or is it the power systems, the inertia of global economics and politics that inundate us? What keeps us from feeling empowered to make serious change? I wanted to flip the idea of inundation, really, that we're inundated by emotions of despair, denial, and fear more than we are inundated by water itself. And this is what we really need to face.
Can you talk a bit more about the art that you wanted to include?
So I invited artists to make pieces that reconnect us to the environment, to understand that our affinity to water can actually help heal the emotional overwhelm, and to be a place to begin to truly positively future. The pieces are all very immersive and mesmerizing and contemplative. They're very different than a lot of environmental documentaries. There is a lot of video in the show, but there's also sculpture and installation. And in terms of video, I love Angela Tiatia's work because she's showing the power of her own body and the power of relating to and building intimacy with the ocean, not being afraid of the ocean, but experiencing how she's actually a part of it. And then in terms of sculptural installation, I really loved Mary Babcock's contribution. She made 2 different versions of a stitched wax paper installation. For the Honolulu version, she made this huge immersive wax paper space where viewers were really drawn into the blue wash that felt both like ice melting and the Pacific Ocean at the same time. The piece also invites an intimate relationship with the ocean, while also subtly addressing really complex political and economic issues about why countries like the US, Australia, and China are giving aid to small Pacific Island states in terms of climate change. On the surface level, what they're doing is altruistic in aiding these countries to build seawalls, for instance. But on a deeper level, it's also about their continued access to important resources on these islands and strategic military bases that they want to maintain. The Filipino sister and brother team DAKOgamay also uses immersive filmmaking to reconnect viewers to the ocean. They made Tidal, which is a 2-part film featuring the coastlines of their home, Bantayan Island on the Philippines, and also Tongatapu, the main island of Tonga. It's a slow, beautiful documentation that allows viewers to process the similarities about what's happening in both of these places, even though the populations are quite different. And if you watch their studio visit film, they talk a lot about these 2 islands and the transformations that they see, so please look at that. Their work is incredibly important in terms of witnessing. I started following them because of the way they collaborate with communities. Their films are very much for their communities. They often film with fishermen, they film parades. Their work is more about involving the folks that they live with than it even is about a global audience. Mina, it's been such a great pleasure to work with you on traveling Inundation to Donkey Mill and hear your perspectives and what you've learned from the artists that I've chose. So I'd like to open up a space for you to talk a bit about how you've connected with the artists, what projects you're interested in, especially maybe a few that we haven't talked about. James Jack and Kathy Jetnil-Kijiner and Joy Enomoto's installation, maybe?
It's been an amazing experience working with Joy and Kathy's piece, Sounding. The installation deals generally with the history of militarism and environmental damage in the Pacific through the specific history of hydrography, mapping, and detonation. Kathy Jetnil-Kijiner includes some recordings of new poems that tie together the plight of animals in Pacific waters, like whales with Pacific Islanders, and even emphasizes their kinship. As in many of her works, woven Marshallese bananor baskets act as a presence and a reminder of the resiliency of Marshallese people. Jaimey, I was inspired by the community building you, Joy, and Kathy did on Oahu to ask the We Are Micronesia Club in Waipahu to collaborate in making baskets for the first iteration. Here in Kona, it's been an amazing experience to work with Wode Japel, a Marshallese women's leadership group, which will be leading basket weaving workshops here at the mill. I'm also so thrilled you introduced me to James Jack, who contributed a piece that shares Okinawan perspectives of the history of the US and Japanese military on their islands. Kathy and Joy bring the whale in their piece, and James created a video and series of ink drawings that share some amazing stories about how Okinawan traditions connect to animal and element spirits, like the dugong, shaping their responses to the climate. What I've learned about James in this process of putting together some projects for the Donkey Mill is that community engagement is an integral part of his artistic process. And James will be joining us here at the mill next spring as a Laila Art Fund artist in residence. I've so appreciated learning from each of these artists. Jaimey, I wanted to ask you if you've seen hope through this process.
Lots of hope, especially if we think outside of the very limited mindset of climate crisis. The climate crisis is only one perspective and one possible future. Yes, we will all face storms and heat, that's inevitable, but how we do it is very, very important. There are many examples of Pacific communities that are creating solutions that connect people back to the environment so that they can be resilient, food sovereign, water and sovereign, even in these impending contexts. There are many paths and many futures, and what I'm most excited by and want to support is the idea of indigenous futures, especially in the Pacific context. Supporting Pacific people's agency and sovereignty is part of a larger pathway towards peace building, social and cultural repair. And I'm a firm believer that art and design can help us practice and imagine these futures. So it's really important for me to see these possible futures. And one comparison that I think really exemplifies this is between Charles Lim's work and Kaili Chun's work. Charles Lim has been working in Singapore. He's a highly acclaimed artist, and he's developed a whole series of works about Singapore's relationship to the ocean. Together we chose the last in this series called Sea State, and the piece basically tells the history of a version of the future that is development based, that is very carbon intensive based still. Lim has done some amazing research to understand Singapore's history of land reclamation and these massively scaled projects to mine sand from the surrounding regions. And what his films expose is that this process, even while it shores up Singapore's own land base and helps create a high-tech urban core that may be in some small way resilient to sea level rise, it is also creating really immense environmental damage to water and agriculture in the outlying regions. So it's a very limited view of the future. I think he's a really amazing artist in the way that he is able to communicate a critique of this kind of futuring through the beauty of the slow, still frames of sand mining. Kaili Chun's piece, on the other hand, looks at parallel processes of land reclamation on Oahu. And she focuses on Waikiki and the airport and the east side of Oahu. And in her piece, she offers a vision of a very different kind of future if we simply allow the high tides to come back to these low-lying areas. And these low-lying areas were once really vibrant estuary systems with fish ponds and farming. So what she does in her pieces is connect the future back to the past, and a past that respects the wisdom of where the water must flow in order to provide clean water aquifers and rich soil for food production. Chun's work and really all of the pieces are trying to connect us back to the water as a source of learning and a source of abundance, if we take enough for what we need and not be greedy. We all together make the future, and we need more visionary art and design that will allow us to see that the more people that co-create a future together, the better that future will be for everyone. How about for you, Mina? Has working on this exhibition given you hope?
Yes, instead of seeing climate change issues as abstract and far away, we can embrace the concept of aloha aina, which can serve as a model throughout the world. Aloha aina is an integral concept of Hawaiian thought, culture, and cosmology. Through the lens and practice of aloha aina and activating these principles individually and as a community, we can encourage each other, our keiki and opio, our community leaders, consumers, producers, and everyone in between, to strengthen connections with our aina and make the changes necessary to support a culture of immersion and engagement instead of inundation and displacement.
The key, of course, is to not let stories of crisis inundate or paralyze us. If we do small things in our communities, we'll see how those efforts connect together and make larger and larger changes, like a wave. It starts with small surface tension, it builds over time and space, and then we move together.